Hello, friends of the Austin Institute, and once more, welcome to our show, to our podcast, What We Can't Not Talk About. And what an episode we have for you today. As you can see, today, again, we are here with a live guest, and we will talk about something that makes us, the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture, truly unique. And also, we're going to talk about something that way too few people talk about, and almost nobody does anymore. Guess what? We're going to talk about marriage. And to talk about marriage and to talk about why it is good for us, it is good for society. We're very lucky to have with us today Dr. Amy Hamilton, Research Associate at UT. Hello, Amy.
Hello, Mariana. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting our invitation, for finding the time. I know you're very often very busy with research, with family. You are married,
yes,
right? So you're one of those.
Yes.
There's very few. As I said, I mean, you are a research associate at UT, and very recently you were a co-editor for the updating of a little booklet that the Witherspoon Institute, an institution is a friend of ours, of the Austin Institute, published, Marriage and the Public Good, 10 Principles. Mm-hmm. So you co-edited the updating of this little book. Mm-hmm. But before we go into the 10 Principles and the little booklet and what it's for, why, how, when did you decide to study marriage and to become an expert, as you are today, on this topic?
I appreciate the question. I had actually had the privilege of meeting Mark Regnerus right around the time that he founded the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. And we had corresponded on other issues. I was interested in gender and sexuality just for my own story and my own research in the past, what I had done my dissertation topic on and so forth. And so we talked a bit, and he encouraged me to write and connect with public discourse and the Witherspoon Institute. And so I've been writing articles on gender and sexuality for the public discourse for many years. And Mark and I had fruitful conversations around those topics. And when the update came around, he was the initial choice. Could you do the social science update? And he just didn't have the time, and so I was very blessed that he offered me the chance to really engage with the literature and with being a voice for reiterating the importance of marriage and the uniqueness of marriage and the common good. And so I actually learned so much through doing the update. So it's just a privilege to come very late in a very important project. And I think the timing of the release, the update, we were all kind of hoping I think that it could have gotten out sooner. But I think with the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act and so forth, that it's a very timely publication to reiterate the reasons that traditional marriage between man and woman is a unique institution that benefits everyone in society, even those who don't choose to partake of that institution.
I'm glad you just anticipated my next question, which is, okay, marriage and the public good, and this booklet, as we will see in this principle, defends the idea and shows that there's evidence that marriage is good for society and for the and for anyone involved. But you just mentioned traditional marriage,
yes.
Marriage within. So, what are the characteristics of the marriage that you say the booklet shows is the marriage that is good for society, and then maybe why that's the case? But what are the characteristics? What do we need a marriage to be in order to be good for society?
Well, the components of traditional marriage that are core to the institution and that can be found across cultures throughout history and throughout the major religions, but even in secular situations, this is just the core definition would be man and woman. So there's sexual complementarity, and there's a monogamous exclusive commitment. So the sexual relationship is ordered within the marriage and is constrained to be within that marriage. So we've got complementary union, exclusive union. It was intended to be permanent, right, lifelong. And of course, with that comes the potential for fruitfulness in terms of the bearing of children and procreation. And so I think that's why the state is interested in marriage, because this is what produces the next generation. There's also, I learned so much, there's just stabilizing influences and benefits throughout the generations and throughout the society, again, whether or not you actually are married, but you accrue many benefits through being married. But it's through those four components. That's what makes it a unique and enduring and building block through the society.
Before we go through each of these characteristics, and in order to have them hooked, right, and to make them want to continue to listen,
yes,
what is the most interesting, since you've been working on these issues for a while now, and including working with Professor Igneros, who's our president, as everyone knows here, what was the thing that you recently either remember or rediscovered that was just like, this is great, this is amazing?
About marriage?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think we've become so individualized in our life pursuits and our ideas about what personal fulfillment and personal happiness and so forth are. I think it's that isolated situation of, like, if I'm married, I'm married, I'm happy, I stay in that marriage. If I'm happy, I get out if I'm not happy, and so forth. But I think just realizing that there's a breadth and a wealth of good that comes to the human person, the individual people that engage in this institution, but also just the way it spreads out through generations. And one of the things I was focused on was how we're kind of fixed on the synchronic slice of time. Like, let me take a snapshot of you. Are you happy right now? If you're not happy, then, let's fix that. Let's change that, right? And so, I can think back, I've been married now 15 years, and I can think of some really exhausted times, when I had young children and my life was very full. But I mean, in that snapshot, there were times when I could compare happiness levels, to, well, I would say I was happier when I was single in that moment, right? But we're talking about human flourishing across the lifespan, like what leads to a flourishing society and what leads to a flourishing life. And so I think when I see the ramifications through the lifespan of later on in life, that marriage has a protective effect from suicide for males and for females. And one of those things is that the more connected you are with meaningful life meaningful structures and so forth, or things that you feel have enduring value later in life, that's a huge predictor of happiness and of a protective effect against suicide. And so who reports that more later in life? Well, it's people with children, right? People with deeper family roots and with children that they've been raising. So that investment pays off. So there's investments that pay off, later. And I think just looking at the robust picture, I didn't marry until I was 37. And I had lots of, personal issues of why that wasn't the case, why I really wasn't open to marriage. And so I was just privileged to learn about, had no idea about health benefits. I had no idea about that, if you could package marriage, all the health benefits that accrue in marriage to the individual people, if you could package that, one health writer called it, you'd have to call it a wonder drug. I mean, these were just things that I learned by engaging in this research. Whereas I feel like if I'd have known, I might have,
Okay, sorry,
yes,
interrupting
please.
you.
Please.
I agree because,
No.
of course, I have my stories.
Yes.
And I agree with most of the things you say. I want to go back to this synchronic view of time. Please remind me if I forget. But before we get there, let me raise the objection that friends that I meet in bars, raise me to this. What about bad marriages?
Oh, of course. Now, listen, you have to be honest about what the data says.
Okay.
Right? And the data actually shows that if you're in a high conflict marriage, right, that actually can have a corrosive effect on the health. And so the benefits that are coming through marriage, through reduced stress, right, lower inflammation, fewer incidences of disability, chronic disease, better recovery after surgery. If you're in a high conflict marriage, the opposite has been shown to be the case, where there's actually, because you're in a stressful situation, and that leads to, inflammatory responses and so forth. So the very things that would enhance health in a negative marriage situation can actually work against the health. And the one, I've experienced this personally, the one aspect of marriage that actually doesn't, pan out in terms of better health is weight gain. So that's the one aspect where when you're married, you have to, keep aware that, marriage actually can lead you not to consider your weight as much, both male and female. But that being said, Mariana, the thing is I think that we need to try to help people, because divorce also has a very negative effect.
Let's go there, because we talk about marriage as a permanent union.
Right.
And we also all agree that there is a problem with divorce. At the same time, we are saying something that seems to contradict, right? So saying that there are situations where maybe a divorce is better. So I know that there is a part of the book that addresses this,
right.
and what are the principles that should guide this kind of choice. So Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I in thinking about this, I want to say that, the corrosive effect of like this stressful relationship, that's true, but also there's health effects from actually going through the experience of a divorce, even if maybe there's no other choice. There's been heart health effects that have been found that are clearly attributed to the experience of divorce and aren't remediated. Even if you find a happy second union, quote unquote, and so forth, there's lasting health effects through that experience. And so I think what an achievable thing is to try to help people in their conflict, right? We know the difference between back when there was fault-based divorce, right? It was the 3 A's, right? Abandonment, adultery, or abuse. And so that's a reasonable thing. That's allowing the fact that there needs to be...
Which I think most of our listeners, I know that and I want to go back to that part. We know a lot of very good people that are facing divorce. But, I would like to say, yes, adultery, abandonment, abuse. Please don't feel bad if your marriage didn't last and this was present.
Right. I mean, see, the thing is that I'm here with no stones to throw. No one has any stones to throw, because we're all living in a very broken culture and a broken society, right? But I think that's why it's even more important to re-articulate the goods of marriage and to see what can we do, because basically we just have had let the floodgates open, like no fault divorce. Just let every floodgate open and washed away any kind of effort to shore up people in that synchronic slice of time where I'm very unhappy in this marriage, or this is not going well, right? And so if we could reintroduce, not trying to trap people in unhealthy or bad situations, but reintroduce the knowledge that actually, going through a divorce is also going to harm your health. Is there any way we can reconcile this? We know you need help. I think especially in faith situations where people are, partaking of religious communities and so forth, we need to step up and say we need to help people through the life cycle, get marriage mentors, make things available to people to determine, can this be reconciled, because that is a preferable outcome. And I think the fact that we have no fault divorce, where someone can exit a marriage as if easier than they can exit any other business contract, they can just null and void, because I declare.
And you only need, because many, maybe the youngest people in the room, in the audience don't know, you're divorced against your will.
Exactly.
No fault divorce means one of the two asks for it, and you can't do anything.
You have no recourse, right? And so if we could put some speed bumps even down in the road, right? There are situations where I don't know honestly the current status, but there used to be if there was a contested divorce, one person doesn't want it, there could be waiting periods, a year or even multiple years, or a requirement to go to go to counseling, or some have suggested a requirement that people would actually see and learn the social science about the effects on children if they have children, so that people could stop and say, maybe we should try to work this out. Because especially if you have children, I've heard Jennifer Robach Morris at the Ruth Institute mention this. Like, you are going to be negotiating with that person, the partner, the spouse, the rest of your life if you have children. And so for the sake of them, can we slow down instead of just, I'm in pain, I want out, And so it's not about throwing stones or trying to trap somebody in a situation, but can we at least try to slow the train down? Because now there are no walls.
And instead, policies and laws are going in every country in every other direction. So you have this immediate divorce, like no wait, zero wait, you go and which, raises the questions like, okay, so what's the value of the vows? What's the value of the promise that was made? But why do you think people are wanting this immediate way out?
Well, I think that we, especially in the West, we're not as accustomed to suffering, and we have a pill for every pain, and we've been sold a lie, basically through the media and through, and we've been complicit in the lie,
wanting to believe it,
right? But we've been sold a lie that nothing is worse than an unhappy marriage, and your kids are going to be fine, they're resilient, and you need to take care of yourself first. And it's really, I think that's what, we're not trying to, again, sling stones. We're trying to, we want the best for the most people, right?
Yeah, and I wanna say something here. We realized recently that everyone except Professor Margaret Nares on the staff at the Austin Institute is, a child of divorce.
A child of divorce, yeah.
Statistically, it's usually not the case that the attendees of the Austin Institute are, because marriage and the good of marriage is inherited, right, by children. So certain values then get transmitted, and usually if you didn't see them in a family, that's not what you're going to look for when you're in college. But so I like to believe that there is a very small number of children of divorce who actually recognize what the problem has been in their life and probably put all their effort in trying to stop the tide and saying, hey, please don't, which is probably how I feel now about interviewing you, right?
Right.
And talking about marriage and the good of marriage, because even though in my teens and in my 20s and probably even in my early 30s, I would say that there's absolutely no difference. I have my issues, but they do not come from the fact my parents are divorced, because it was right, because it was better that way, and no one told me, I'm sorry, right, that your parents are divorced. It took me a long time, but I now realize that, guess what statistically happens to every child of divorce happened to me too.
Yes.
Yes. And so I would like for those in the audience that can read more about this, again, in the small booklet and in other books that have been published. But what are these adverse effects of divorce on children?
Yes, there are many, and what we want to say that it's not it's not a curse, and it doesn't mean that you can't overcome. But
I'm doing great.
But we want to acknowledge the fact, and that's the thing, because the lie has been that the kids are going to be fine. The kids are fine, and actually, the landmark divorce study, 25-year follow-up and stuff like, it's very clear. It was Judith Wallerstein, but the kids are not fine, and this plays out in every area. So children, the girls that are raised in the home without the father, if the father left the home, because that's usually what happens, even though there's divorce and they're still involved in the child's life, they obviously are removed from the home. So the girls, if their father left before the age of 6, I think they're 7 times more likely, check it, but it's around there, 7 times more likely to experience a teenage pregnancy. if they're, or unwed pregnancy in their youth, if their father left.
Which is not only psychological. I remember reading that there's something even related to the
early
smell.
menarche. Yeah. That's if you're raised with a non-biological male in the home.
No, what I was referring to is like that having a male, your dad present, makes the body of the woman, the daughter in this case, desire the body of another man a lot less.
Oh, really?
Because there is a balance somehow in this. I think I remember this correctly.
I was referring to the early onset of menses because I was adopted, and so the fact that you're raised with non-biological, a wonderful adoptive father, but not biologically related, girls tend to start their periods 1 year earlier if they have a non-biologically related male in the home. So I was blessed with an adoptive home, but I started a year earlier than I probably would have. And earlier menses is usually earlier can lead to earlier sexual debut and all these unwanted effects. But things, I mean, it affects school performance. It affects lifetime earnings. I think there was calculated a study that was around $62,000 earnings penalty that could be predicted from being a child of divorce. The ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, right? They are coming out with more and more research about how those ACEs kind of pay it forward. They go into the future, and you reap unwanted benefits, right? Unwanted negative consequences from those events. And two of the most common events are separation, parental divorce or separation, and often that's coupled with poverty, right, or economic hardship.
Yeah.
And so one thing they've found is like long-term health effects, because the body gets stuck in like fight or flight, and there's the stress response, and there's chronic inflammation. And so I just,
which again is not to throw stones, because we know that sometimes divorce, separation is absolutely necessary. But if parents know
exactly,
and they're not told, oh, it's gonna be great,
right?
You know, whatever you do, your kids are happy. Don't you see they're playing? There's just to be aware that there is, you know, that they will probably develop trust issues, that they will probably feel lonelier than their peers.
Oh, and these effects, that's why like the multiplicity of effects is just staggering and you know, fascinating, but in a sad way. So, you know, can't speak highly enough about Institute of Family Studies and Brad Wilcox and all of their research over there. And I've been seeing recently how they've done, you know, the harms of social media and teens and technology, right?
The social contagion, is that what you're
Well, no, just the negative self-image and the depression levels of teenage girls, but also of males, you know, and the negative influence of their being exposed to social media and the harmful effects of the internet and so forth. And so when you look at that, that's kind of across the board. That's going to affect all children. But guess who it affects more? It affects more children of divorce, right? Because they're split between two households.
Less time spent with you, and
there's less control. There's less control, right? There's less oversight.
Oh, I think I was the freest teenager.
Yeah, and so it's, you know, it's not faulting anyone, but when you split the child, you know, between two homes, there's just going to be less parental oversight, or there's one set of rules here and there's a laxer set of rules. So who's suffering more from those negative tech effects are actually the children that are already suffering effects from other things, right, from the separation of their parents. And so I think, and it's not to throw stones, but it's informing people. I was very glad to see a counter example. An article came out from a woman who talked about the harms of what she just, again, I don't remember where it was, but she was writing about how she had a good enough marriage. They were middle-aged, their kids were, you know, I guess middle school age, and she was successful, he was successful, and there was low conflict, but they just got bored. And she listened to the lies of the culture, and one of them just, you know, started another relationship and they got a divorce. And she was writing honestly from looking back at like, what a stupid decision that was, what a harmful decision that was, what a selfish decision that was, and she didn't realize it at the time. And still having to look at what the home that, you know, they willingly tore apart, but again, I have mercy on them, right? Have compassion, because believing the cultural lies that, oh, you're feeling kind of stagnant in this relationship. This marriage isn't, exciting anymore. Well, go find a new partner.
Yeah, and you deserve better.
Yeah, right? what she says, the effects on her kids. And again, I say that with all compassion. I was so grateful for the honesty.
Which honestly, I also think, and we can't prove it, but the anthropology, that describe us as, embodied souls, what you can't undo what your body is. Like the fact that you've had a generative union.
Right.
You can try to forget, but it stays with you. And so somehow there is a division, even regardless of the presence of children and the effect of them, I have a hard time believing that it doesn't have a lasting effect on the individual that goes through it.
It does. I mean, it does. Again, that's part of the cardiovascular, damage and so forth that was referenced. And so, again, I think just trying to shore people up with knowledge of really things can be worked out. In fact, there's a study that again, many studies.
And wait a minute, because we were talking about divorce here and we're trying to keep that together, but what we're facing is that people are not getting married.
Well, we're also facing that. We're also but that plays into it, right? Because children of divorce are less likely to believe they can form that lasting union, and the more examples we have, right, of these, it's kind of we're again, it's compounded interest. But I just want to mention there is one study where couples were seriously considering divorce, and they went through counseling and so forth, and 5 years later they were still together. They were surveyed, and they were happy they had stayed together. Again, life is going to entail suffering, and going through the experience of divorce is going to entail suffering, just like trying to work it out. So I think just encouraging, because we are in a society where it is just, there's hardly any encouragement to try to work it out anymore, even for the sake of kids,
And why are we talking about marriage and not about cohabitation? Couldn't cohabitation?
Well, I think that cohabitation is honestly one of the greater threats to why people are not getting married, because it mimics and it imitates marriage, in that it can look the same, and societally you have a couple that's living together and often they're treated the same, again with family and so forth, and that that's where they're at. But I think that's another thing that's very important to reiterate to the young, is that it's not the same. The cohabitation you don't have the same commitment. You don't have the commitment of...
Someone has not promised you.
No, this is not a total giving of the self, because it's conditional. There's no...
As long as I like you.
As long as I want to be here, right? And so there's much higher rates of infidelity. There's much higher rates of intimate partner violence. There's much higher rates of breakup, even if you have children. There's much higher rates of, that union is probably statistically more likely not to endure, even if you have the presence of both biological parents in the home. It doesn't convey the same health benefits, maybe to some degree, but again, you're entering into a different kind of union. But because it looks so similar, right, I think it's very important to make sure that the young know that, hey, actually, the research is showing that your best bet for having an enduring marriage is not to live together first and to marry relatively young, again, from Institute of Family Studies.
It's hard for me to understand why, I don't know if it's a part of the way I reason about these things, but it's hard for me to understand why someone who's been hurt by life would settle more easily with, let's say, a woman, right? Settle more easily with a guy that doesn't commit, that doesn't promise, that doesn't show that level of engagement, right? Because what we're seeing is that boys and girls are preferring this, as if it keeps me more free. Yeah, but at the same time, what is the kind of interest in myself that I perceive? Are you so little interested in me that you're really not doing everything you can to just get... Maybe I'm being romantic, but if it's not, if you're not desired to the point of someone saying, this is what this is my desire, is to be with you.
Right.
I don't know what is making us have such a low bar.
Well, I think in some ways, I can grab Mark's book here, Professor Rigneris, The Future of Christian Marriage. I think one of the things is that we have a low bar for, sexually intimate relationships. We have a very high bar for marriage, perhaps too high. And so he writes about how we've had a shift, I think largely because of economy and so forth, where marriage is no longer seen as a foundational thing that you do and you build a life together, but it's a capstone. It's the feather in your cap. It's what you do when you have every other duck in the row, all the ducks in the row. You've gotten your career established. You've gotten your higher ed degrees. You've done your world travel that you wanted to do before you get tied down. And so then you're hitting 30 and beyond.
No, 42,
right. Well,
45.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
and they're still, believe me, they still think they're too young.
And so I think that's part of it, right? So you don't want to marry and divorce, right? You don't, we can't, I'm not ready for marriage. But then you're asking people to have a very long period of, chastity or sexual, and so they're not willing to do that. And so cohabitation seems like, especially for those that are not.
But then, okay, so can we try the consequence of this is that with cohabitation, you're going to do it for a long time, probably even when you're 50, because the more you cohabitate, the less you're going to desire marriage for other reasons, right? Because you have the other benefits. And so these will lead you not to have the benefit of marriage, actually. Right? Yeah. So you will get that less, as we said, the outcomes are like that. Your children outcomes will not be as good as they could have been in marriage. Right. And by staying in that, it's like, to me, it feels like having a lot of chips before dinner, right?
Right.
So you keep eating chips, and you think you're, wow, I don't have to wait for dinner. I can do this now.
I know, right?
But then, that steak is just not gonna attract you as much.
Well, and I think that's why we have to really, for the sake of, people are free to make their choices, but you want to give them accurate information. And so you want to.
But can you? Okay, question.
You want to tell.
Can researchers today defend traditional marriage, and is the research, is academia willing to listen to these things?
I don't know if they're willing, but the data is there. I mean, if you look at again. IFS and Brad Wilcox and Wendy Wong and the success sequence. If you finish high school, work full time, and you get married before you have children, 95% of people avoid poverty, and that's across the board for the races, every ethnicity, minority sex, doesn't matter. If there's the high school, it's called the success sequence, and yet we want to. And if you want enduring marriage, right? If you don't want to experience the heartache of divorce, guess what? Don't cohabit. Don't cohabit, because the research shows that it makes you more prone to have your marriage more likely to end in divorce. And I think, again, when the common understanding of marriage as permanent, exclusive, lifelong commitment, when that's watered down, then the sad thing is that young people are entering. It can't, even the ones that do marry, if they enter into it under a reduced understanding or an erroneous understanding, then they might not accrue all the goods that they could have, because again, it's just they don't understand anymore. And now, honestly, it's never been more important than to make the natural law case for these. This is why marriage between male and female under these conditions, this core institution, this is why it's a common good that leads to human flourishing for the most members of society. And
why not?
Because now, to say that, it has to be articulated, because now we have competing forms of marriage, right? Now we have same-sex marriage,
and why not same-sex marriage?
Why not same-sex marriage? I mean, there's same-sex partnerships, but it's not marriage, and it cannot contain these core principles.
If we define marriage as the permanent and exclusive union that can lead to the procreation of children, then the same-sex marriage by definition cannot be done.
Right.
But the opposite, the objection at the bar, again, from my friends would be, of course you can.
Well,
one of the two as a child, and and then gets adopted by the other, and then you have the same-sex couple with kids.
Yes, with kids that by design is demanding that the child loses or does not have at all a connection with one of his or her biological parents.
Right, and so the objection again is, yes, but what if the previous marriage was abusive and there was no love? Isn't this better? Isn't this even better?
Well, it's interesting because the...
these are the kind of conversations we are required to have, right?
Yes, of course. Okay. But let's just take a normal situation of divorce.
Yeah.
The tragedy of divorce, always a tragedy. Even if it's a necessity, right? This is a tragedy. Nobody marries with wanting that to be the outcome. So even if that happens, and the parent remarries, did you know that the remarriage does not improve? It doesn't really. It's not like, a replacement parent is all good. It actually doesn't have the kind of benefits that people want to believe it has for children, and the effects that it's just different. Like they've gone through this, they've gone through a separation, or at least some degree of separation.
Yeah.
And
you have had this experience as an adopted. You mentioned earlier you're an adopted child,
right?
And it's a wonderful family, but it wasn't like.
Well, the truth is that it has effects, right? Because in the natural order of things, you're genetically, you come from the union of two people, and there's genetic similarities. There's the familial similarities.
Smell, maybe.
There's I mean, everything. Again, think about the early onset menarche for kids for girls that are in. So I guess what I'm saying is, so when you go to same-sex marriage or same-sex situations, you're automatically taking away two of the things that are known to make children thrive. One is having both biological parents present in the home, and even both cohabiting parents don't have the same effects. Even if they're both biologically related, when they don't have that exclusive, permanent, lifelong commitment.
And why'd you say same-sex couples don't?
Well, I'm saying even for male-female couples, if they're cohabiting and they have children, they still haven't made that permanent exclusive commitment. So they're still subject to higher rates of infidelity and breakup, right? And
so we're not talking about our ideas of how things develop. We're talking about data.
This is data, right? Yeah. And so even you can look at school performance, where children with cohabiting mother, father, and they're both biologically related, even their school outcomes are not actually the same as married parents, biological male and female parents to the child. And perhaps part of that's related to economics as well, because marriage is a wealth building institution in ways that cohabiting is not. Because
marriage is also very expensive, though.
In what sense?
It's one of the objections at the bar.
That's the wedding. That's very different than the marriage, right? Because it's very clear that married couples accumulate vastly more assets and income than either cohabiting or singles, comparatively. So I think that you bring up a very good point. I think we need to take a lot more focus off the wedding. That synchronic slice of time. I think a lot of people
loved eloping during COVID.
Right, that synchronic slice of time where we're going to spend so much money and resources on the wedding, and we need to put that more into building up the marriage. But I want to mention back to same-sex marriage, and so this is just the nature of the arrangement. So you have two females, you lose complementarity in the home. There's not a sex balance. There's no male in that. And that's half the human species, and we all come from male and female. And so a child is receiving only one of the benefit of only one of the sexes, either in male pairings or female pairings. And the other thing that you see is that there are different rates of stability and different rates of fidelity. So honestly, contrary to what I would have maybe initially thought, female couples are actually the least stable.
I'm not surprised. When I read that, I was just like, of course.
It's funny because
girls?
For for me, I was honestly surprised. But
Okay.
they actually, across nations, and we have enough data now across nations, it's consistent. They have at least double and sometimes triple the rate of dissolution. So the thing with same-sex male couples is they are by definition, I can't say by definition, but let's say that monogamy is certainly not a core component of those unions.
Okay.
So the rate of open relationships or non-monogamous, consensually non-monogamous, I mean, that's not a feature.
And I think that if there's anyone of the same sex that is listening, probably they can confirm if they're honest that yes, there's less focus on like being faithful.
Right. Well, I think,
other.
and again, researchers in the past had even just created a new definition of faithfulness, right?
Okay.
So as emotional fidelity, but sexual fidelity is more of a, of a bug than a feature. The feature would be that these are open relationships.
Okay.
And again, I'm not saying all, but the data shows that, for instance, the same-sex married couples in a American couples survey, the rate of men having an extramarital partner for the gay males that were reporting was 21% of those within the last 12 months had an extra partner. And among that 21%, the average number of extra partners was 12. And so that's like at least six times the rate of infidelity that a male-female couple would experience. Cohabiting couples also.
And of course, objections could come bounce.
Right.
Well, people are not reporting. But let's leave it there. As you said, the data is there, and then we can read it. If you want to read it with a skeptical lens, you can.
Right.
I want to push back, though, when you said data is there. So, I don't know if we can talk about this in the academia. And I want to push back because there is a reason we keep asking for donations. Mm-hmm. There is a reason, that every email has a click button on it. Because this booklet was not published by UT Austin.
Right.
We are not seeing tenure track positions opening for people who have defended the good of marriage. And the data that Professor Rigneros was the first one to publish caused actually a lot of trouble, right? So, I know there's an associate here, but I think we can say that we live in a time and age where actually we are trying to defend these things that are shown by numbers and data, but we're not really welcome to do it.
This is true.
Okay.
Yes, of course, this is true. And I think, again, I don't know if you want to hold up
Yes.
the booklet. So,
Marriage in the Public Book, 10 Principles.
Yeah, Marriage in the Public Good, and you can find that at the Witherspoon Institute website. It's supposed to be in the Canavox store. Again, Canavox is go to canavox.org, and it's got
or to our website, and there's a Canavox dedicated section too.
Good, yes. And so that link there, the good that they're doing and trying to articulate this. But I'm telling you, it's more important than ever, because now, of all the harms that we're trying to prevent, and we're trying to create human flourishing, again, it's not so much what we're against. We are for human flourishing, and we're for human flourishing for children and for adults. Again, the health benefits of marriage I had no idea of. There's just so many things, and it ripples through the generations. All the way up to the top, and the older generations down to the younger generations.
And if you have kids, they're going to take care of you when you're in older age, right? And instead, if you are getting older and you're alone, you start realizing that no one is calling you. I have a lot of friends in their 50s that, they didn't get married, that the bachelor syndrome, and now they are afraid whenever they get sick.
Right.
There is no one to call, and your friends have other things to do, because friends,
and that's why you want to, and you're grateful for married friends that have children, right? And that there's a community forming that can take care of you and can help you as a single person. We're all connected, but the fewer and fewer and fewer that marry, I think I saw the statistics, like 1 in 6 women now in America it will reach 40 without marrying. I mean, marriage is at historic lows. And sadly, it's becoming increasingly a class divide. Yeah. Because the more educated and the more higher income levels are still are the ones that get the benefits of marriage. And yet we've gutted out protections for the most disadvantaged, and it just creates more disadvantage. It's tragic. I think there was a 60% difference between married moms, upper income moms that are married 95% compared to something like a 37% rate for lower income moms that were married. It creates so many disparities. But what I wanted to say,
if we really were social justice oriented,
oh yeah,
right?
you want to yes,
yeah.
Nobody wants. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but no, it's not that nobody wants. But I'm telling you, if you address family structure, if you strengthen traditional marriage, if you can tie more family bonds together, father, mother, children, and
intergenerational too, right?
Keep that intact. Yes, keep that intact. You will reduce mass incarceration. You will reduce crime rates. You will reduce abortion, because most abortions are coming in situations of unwanted pregnancies, obviously, not planned, not wanted. Most of those occur in non-marital situations, right? You correct the, I saw the statistics about the men that are not in the labor force, men out of participating in the labor force in their prime work years, higher than ever in the U.S. Well, people can attribute to, there's many factors, but it's one of the things that's reported is chronic health conditions. Well, if you think about the ACEs, in terms of the adverse childhood experiences, and you have men without fathers, men without role models, and inflammatory systems, you've got kind of forces arrayed against them.
I would encourage anyone who's listening to this also to just try to remember and think about their friends and those that are more or less sick in one way or another, or out of, and try to think about their family, because I think that anecdotally we can all confirm just among our own friends the truth of what you're saying.
Right.
An interesting aspect of this, I think, we've talked about the future of Christian marriage, the book that Professor Ganaros wrote, the latest one, but there's one that is still very, very contemporary in his analysis. Is Chip Sachs. I think it's still my favorite, because I do think, you mentioned how there needs to be formation on the good of marriage and like why it's good for you, because again we're sold the lie that it's all the same, if not actually better, in another way with polyamorous.
Right.
But another thing that is affecting the market is the cheap sex and the porn world, right? Because I cannot but think that if men did not have access to women outside of marriage, then we would see a dramatic increase probably in the next 24 hours.
Right. Yeah. I think
women understand this?
I think one of the things that I just, thinking about contemporary cultural issues, in wake of the Dobbs decision, if you look at it, there was at least, I don't know how much the statistics, but they were certainly hyping it in the media, of the men that were seeking vasectomies, right, in the wake of the Dobbs decision. And so when I think about that, again, it just, you kind of hurt inside, because people have just lost their way in understanding the good of sex within committed relationship, and the good of children and so forth. And so that's absolutely a contributor. I mean it's one that, again, I feel like there's kind of this twofold, like the house is on fire, grab a bucket, you know what I mean? We've got, there's flames, there's everywhere, but there's also so much to point to about the good, and I think that's a critical thing. One thing I mentioned, we mentioned in the update of Marriage and the Public Good, the 10 Principles book, is that the gray divorce revolution. So now we have generations that are coming of age, and we've all imbibed the lies, right, of just seek your own happiness and so forth. And so now we have the upper generations getting divorced and not realizing the impact that flows down. My in-laws are about to celebrate 63 years of marriage, and the good of taking my children to the intact grandparent home, right, I can't imagine the pain that it would be if I was taking, oh, well, there's, grandma and her spouse, or grandpa and he's alone, they're divided. It just pays benefits. And again, then again, I'm not trying to throw stones, because we've all imbibed the lies. I read stories, and I know personally a story where the no-fault divorce is not protecting vulnerable seniors. So I have a dear friend, and the husband is old, they're older, 70s, 80s, and he's got some dealings with cognitive decline and dementia, and so it's kind of mood swings, and he'll want to file for divorce. And in the current situation, there would be nothing she could do if he chose to push through that, to protect, and she's the one that's caring for him. And so again, it's just, and people don't realize, again, the financial impact and the disruption. How could you believe it at that age that this is really the solution? Where are we to come around and say, it's worth saving, don't do this. This is a synchronic moment, and you're being led astray. The actually protective thing, the thing that's going to lead to more longevity for you, a healthier outcome, a longer life, a happier life, is it actually, if you could work this out, especially these marriages that have been already for decades.
And if you do it younger, we have all the evidence that the younger you are, the wealthier you'll get, the healthier you'll be, the longer you live. So we could say, title of this episode, go get married, do it now, right? At the same time, and here's where, I love working in a place that is not ideological, and where I can say what I think. I have an objection there. And I want to talk to you about this, because I think it's extremely important for those that have followed up until now. And they probably are on board with everything. So probably even, for religious reason, or they believe in this, and so what I'm witnessing is that in this same cohort, there's a lot of desire to get married, and maybe this decision is also made, and it ends up poorly. It ends up, with, even though, they would have promised that no, divorce would never have happened, and there's no way, there's we're going to make it work, and I'm witnessing it, right? So in the socially conservative cohort of young and married couple, there is a good portion that goes through some very hard time. And so I think I want to hear what you think about this. But you mentioned how we are believing that happiness is in the moment, and so we have this synchronic perception of life. So don't you think that in order for marriage to have all the benefits that we've listed, there needs to be a change in the person? You mentioned we're being very individualistic and very...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course. And I think that's one of the things that makes me very sad about, again, as we see the loss of marriage across the board. And Janet Smith is a academic, and she's written a lot on just the effects of the contraceptive mentality and so forth. And one of the things she just brought up, aside from that issue, but she just brought up having children makes us instantly better people, because we start caring about something beyond ourselves. And suddenly you're interested in how good the school systems are, or you care about what the future is going to be in ways that you didn't when you didn't have children. And my point is just to say, I realized I got married at 37, and there's a lament that I couldn't have gotten the benefits of just having that self-sacrifice being forced upon me at an earlier age. And so I think you ideally, for a marriage to work, that's one of the things. It completes the person through creating inherent dependencies and relationships that require you to think outside of yourself. And so that's why I'm saying I think churches need to step up for marriage mentoring. And again, this is for any human, any young person, anybody. But in our societies, we've lost family connections. So many more of us are coming from broken family situations, and so we're all carrying around more aces in the first place, right? We're in a wider sphere of where it's just, the cultural understanding of why these things are even important are being lost. And so I think that even if someone has the right mindset and principles, like what has their formation been, right? What are their wounds? What are they carrying in? So, I'm not a psychologist, but we need mentorship to where we can wrestle with the things that we're dealing with, or the men who want, to be good husbands, and yet the constant drip of the IV drip of, porn. That it's like being hooked up to morphine and you've got the button in your hand. I don't know what that's like. I know how destructive it is. I know that I believe, ethically, all of these things, all of my objections, and yet I don't know what it's like to be a man that is literally walking around with a cell phone that is like an IV drip. Yeah. If I get stressed, you can know all the right things, but man, I'm in pain. It's kind of like the get me out of here. I'm going to hit that. So I think all of those things need to be taken into account. But that's why we have to come alongside one another and build healthier communities and become better people together, whether, and hopefully that would lead to more marriages for the sake of society. Because what we're seeing, Mariana, I think is a hardening of the heart. I think there's a loss of love. The more
believe me, I completely agree. And probably the reason I wanted to specify this is that, yes, go get married, but it's a fix only if you love. Right. Go get married, but love within the marriage. Because if you think that it's just going to be an added good, you buy marriage, you're going to get this results. No, this is not going to work.
No. You're going in with that's the book goes into the philosophical, some of the philosophical arguments for marriage. But again, it's like entering into this, you will become a healthier, whole, more whole person. And part of that is through giving yourself away. And I think
that's the part when you mentioned the contraceptive mentality. The moment there is the contraceptive mentality, the moment you're not giving, the moment you're holding back, you're not loving completely and you think you're sick, but you're not letting yourself be transformed. Am I right?
Well, I think it just, again, that children are now seen as completely optional. Like sex is supposed to be an infertile activity. That is the mindset that we have. Yeah. Sex is an infertile activity for pleasure and for mutual satisfaction, for our satisfaction of desires. But children are like an add-on. Whereas, in fact, sex is a reproductive activity, right? And that's central to the whole reason the system exists within the human body, right? And of course, we age out of that. And marriage for singles that are beyond childbearing years still produces many goods, right? But I think when we have that attitude, that's why children can just get added on into any arrangement, right? Because the sex is about what's between, the consenting adults, and that's why marriage suddenly, when same-sex marriage was, legalized and made into saying, well, all these things are equal. Well, then immediately the calls came for, well, what about polyamorous couples? Why can't we have 3 people get married? You're being judgmental. Your arrangement is between 2 people. It can be any of the sexes, male, female, and why can't we have a 3rd? And so children are always just added on. They're kind of the afterthought, whereas they used to be central to the whole enterprise. And the whole reason that really the state was most interested in marriage was to solidify that, to establish relations, responsibilities. You can redistribute material resources to try to kind of rectify some of these inequities, but you can't replicate the spiritual capital that's in terms of the instilling of virtues and so forth. Catherine Picolic has written on that from Nobel laureate Fogel had talked about. There's a spiritual capital that's passed on within the family that's hard to quantify, and you can't replicate it. Yeah. But I think that's what I'm saying is in terms of the hardness of the heart of the whole society. right? I think there's got to be a hardness when we really do, like, don't see the good of the married family unit with their own children, raising that, and that we don't want to encourage other people to see that as a good, and where we can even start reacting against that, to actually call that a good is somehow to denigrate or disparage other people's.
Yeah.
So one study that just came out, a survey results that I saw Brad Wilcox had posted up, was showing that surveyed parents now care more about their kids' career and income levels. They care more about that, statistically significantly more from this particular survey, than they do about whether they get married and have children. Yeah. And so you can see this corrosive effect of not understanding what makes for human flourishing, right? So the very things that we were talking about, like, oh, okay, you're really happy in your career right now as a single, you've chosen to prioritize that, but actually look at over the lifespan, the amount of time that you spend alone is going to go like this. The time spent with workmates in office, your career dwindles down. Then you don't have children. Where are those meaningful structures? Where's your community in the end, right? But now it's again that success model of material things. Like we care about, we want them to have all the career advancement and stuff. We've lost our understanding of what the greatest goods in life are.
Which is why I'm extremely grateful to you, to the Witherspoon Institute, for publishing a book that reminds us, right, of all the goods. And at the same time, I'm grateful to work for Professor Igneros, who writes in his last chapter of The Future of Christian Marriage the kind of advice that people should give. And it says, to the parents, be careful what you say.
Oh, yes.
Be careful. Just don't stop, focusing on income and career. Because if you really love them, you want to read this, understand how good marriage is going to be for them, how good kids are going to be for them, and then rephrase your advice, right?
Right.
Which I don't think it's that common to receive.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, and I know my mom always wanted me to get married. It's interesting, but it was kind of where I was, even in my church group, it was more about what you were going to do. And marriage, if it happened, it was just going to happen along the side. Not saying that it wasn't a good, we knew it was a good, but our discussions in our 20s and even mid 20s and late 20s, they were more towards, what am I doing? What's my career? What's my, again, that capstone model. And, that's again the other thing with the, fertility. Like women really think that they're equally fertile in their 30s as they are in their 20s. They really think they're going to get married at 39 and have 4 kids. I mean,
and then there's all the problem that I think you also mentioned again in this little booklet of like the problems then with sperm donation and with surrogacy. Because once you hit that, infertile, those infertile years, then you need to find other ways to,
right.
And so the what is the science there? What do we know about sperm donation and surrogacy by now? Like, why is that different from having your own, having biological, for the same reason that we were mentioning before?
Right. I mean, well, and it's just a violation of human dignity of the people involved. I mean, the child I was born, I was conceived out of wedlock and born to an unmarried mother and given up for adoption. I'm grateful for my life. My life is equally valuable, but I don't have to say that those were the ideal circumstances for me to come into the world, right? Yeah. So the fact that I'm grateful for my life and I'm grateful for being here and so forth, that is, I can still advocate saying, actually, if we can have those births occur within marriage, it's going to be much better for all involved, right?
Which I think is very beautiful what you just said, because we said it multiple times, we're not throwing stones, but also, and I want to reiterate, like, there is no, you're cursed, or this is going to be terrible.
Exactly.
Like, I think that both you and I love our lives desperately, and we like our days. So there's no reason to think that, you're going through a divorce, that's over, your kids are like, no, we're not saying that.
Right.
We're just trying to show the the good that we have evidence to believe exists.
And that it's true.
Yeah.
And we're trying to prevent preventable harm, because the fact is that the majority of divorces are in low conflict marriages. Again, that they are situations that could probably be worked out. If you can save any marriage, it's a win, you know. And when you've got at least 2/3 of them that are not in situations of truly irreconcilable, especially if there are children involved, you know, you're winning. And you're not throwing stones, but you're saying, just, you know, hey, just because, you know, these harms have happened widespread, let's start trying to rebuild the wall here, you know, because we're getting flooded and it's affecting everyone. So with sperm donation and surrogacy and so forth, I mean, these are just intrinsic injuries to human dignity. The purchase of sperm to create an intentionally fatherless child, take the father out of the home. We've talked about all the harms, and yet suddenly, because it's almost like consensual sex, anything goes, right? I can do anything, I can hurt myself, I can do anything as long as consenting. So we have a consenting adult, like this is my desire. And so we completely just throw all that, the truth of what the child is going to experience, out the window, right? So we're creating intentionally fatherless children. And again, you know, oftentimes people that are doing this are, you know, have higher incomes, especially with surrogacy. The income level required is so high. They're privileged to be able to purchase women's bodies for their own use, right? But with, you know, with fathers, the state goes after deadbeat fathers, right? I mean, we're saying this is not a good. The state is already overwhelmed trying to fill fatherless homes and fill those needs that are created, and yet here you have an industry that's intentionally creating fatherless children.
And I read, you know, that several countries have changed their laws and they don't allow anymore the anonymous.
Well, they don't allow the anonymous, and I think part of that, you know, honestly was it's a human rights thing. You have the right to know your origins. I also think there was just pressure because with the DNA and the, you know, DNA, 23andMe, Ancestry, and so forth. I mean, it's harder to stay anonymous. But I think that was one step you can take to rectify. Look, this is not okay.
And then countries that have banned now commercial surrogacy.
Right, banned. Some have banned commercial surrogacy, and some have banned surrogacy altogether because it's inherently exploitative. Right, it exploits
body.
The body of and let's face it, what class of women offers their bodies to be used for pregnancy for others, risking their lives, as the work of Jennifer Law and Center for Bioethics and Culture just document over and over. And they risk their health, but also their very lives.
And I will link, you know, in this episode, we'll link to the books, of course, that we've mentioned, some of the studies, and you know, of course, there's a lot out there that can be found, even though maybe it's not academic, and meaning, you know, produced by the tenure track professors usually. There's one thing, you know, in closing, I just wanted to say that probably only after having worked in this word, you know, family, marriage, and having studied these things, I found myself having started to say to young friends that tell me they're divorced, I started to say, oh, I'm sorry, right? And I found how shocking that sentence is. And I now know, you know, that nobody told me, but like, there's almost an offense reaction. It's like, how'd you dare being sorry?
Exactly.
Like, I'm so much happier now.
Yes.
So I don't know, is it that even countercultural to just say, I'm
yeah,
sorry?
I do believe that is countercultural. And I myself have censored myself.
In saying I'm sorry.
I've said it before, and I've also censored myself, you know, and I've said I'm sorry before, and oh, don't be.
So I would, if
so
there's anything that we can take from this episode and this study, is that maybe we shouldn't feel awkward if we say, I'm sorry, because we have reasons to believe that
it was damaging to your health, and that had to be a hard experience no matter what else. But it doesn't have to be a judgment.
Exactly.
You know, but yes, I think
we're going to be there for you after that, you know. If
we can't do, but again, we're at such a place of denial in our culture that, again, to even acknowledge that divorce is a negative experience can be offensive. And if I can just quickly, I know we're running out of time, but
no, don't worry. I want you to say whatever I missed.
Well, what I want to just make clear is that for all the good reasons that we've talked about, reiterating these for the sake of the common good is so important. But especially now with the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act, we have to reiterate that this is based on reason and the natural outworkings of the human person and human society, that's based in hard fact of what actually happens in data, to demonstrate, for nothing else, this is not based on bigotry or animus or anything, because that's now, with the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act, to advocate for natural marriage, meaning man and woman, contrasted with other alternative family structures, such as same-sex marriage, is now being equated as being a racist and bigoted as if you were against interracial marriage. And just came out where in Georgia, a young policeman had to resign because he posted support for traditional marriage, and his superiors in the police force told him that that's like being a racist.
Tell me in the audience, what does the Respect for Marriage Act have to do with this situation?
Well, in Obergefell, when same-sex marriage was legalized, in that decision, it was it was a decision that was painting those who supported traditional marriage, could potentially paint them as if they were against human rights, against civil rights, as if this had been equated to racial bigotry, because again, it wasn't the equal access was not being given. It was a discriminatory thing, and there was reasoned dissent and also an acknowledgement in the majority ruling that people can object, can believe in traditional marriage and can object to same-sex marriage situations and calling that marriage based on reason, and come to it having reached through reasonable conclusions, not based on animus, right? And so that was at least there in the Obergefell ruling. But with the Respect for Marriage Act, by coupling it, literally making it a conjoined clause, this will protect interracial marriage and same-sex marriage. You've made a false equivalence there.
Okay, I see.
And so now we are in, now there's an increased desire to. It seems like there's an increased opportunity, certainly, and that was what was warned against. And it actually can be seen as already playing out that now to object to same-sex marriage, you are now being equated.
But are we objecting to something if we are showing the good of marriage?
That's what I'm trying to say, is that
because that's what we're doing here, right? We're not telling anyone don't engage in your homosexual relationship in this moment. I mean, that's not what we're doing.
In this moment,
what we're doing
is saying traditional marriage is unique and provides unique goods to society, such that government should try to protect and promote it.
And has done it everywhere, forever.
And it's distinct from same-sex marriage. But now with the RFMA, again, in the cultural imaginary and in media and so forth, it's going to increasingly be portrayed that as if you present this as, you're making the case for traditional marriage, oh, well, then that means you're against same-sex marriage and you're the same as...
Well, that cannot be extrapolated from our conversation.
No.
This is not what we said.
Exactly.
So what we said and what is written here is that marriage and the public good, 10 principles. There's a strict correlation between healthy, intact family with a lot of kids and the health of society and of the families and of the children, of the parents, of the grandparents, of everyone involved.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton, or Amy, for spending this time with us. Thank you for co-editing. Thank you for your work, your research. I know you're working on a book, and we're looking forward to read it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Orlandi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode of our show, What We Can't Not Talk About. If you did like the episode, remember to share it among your friends. Do not forget to subscribe, and if you can, please donate to the Austin Institute. Your donations make it possible for us to continue to do this, but above all, they support our local programming and the important, if not crucial, research of our fellows. Thank you.